What if arrogance could fly faster than bullets? Captain Eric Rayner ran his hand along the cold metal of his Messerschmitt, his confidence shining through the fog-drenched airfield. 8 machine guns, he scoffed with a grin. The Americans think thunder can bite. His laughter carried across the mist, joined by the roars of his comrades. From the shadows, Major Dieter Haas watched, jaw set, the kind of silence that knows how battles end. Inside the radio hut, Corporal Anneliese Vogel looked up from her receiver, unease clouding her calm face. Hours later, the clouds broke with a scream. A P-47 Thunderbolt dove through sunlight, like judgment from the heavens. Fire split the air. Eric's laughter vanished under the fury of engines and the rattle of lead. His squad fell in flames, the sky devouring their pride. When silence came again, only one question hung above the smoke. Why was he the one still breathing? Silence clung to the hangar like grief. Empty bunks, coffee gone cold, boots lined neatly for men who would never return. Major Dieter Haas walked through the wreckage of laughter, eyes hollow, hands clenched behind his back. Eric Rayner sat nearby, mud on his uniform, ash on his skin. Corporal Anneliese Vogel handed him a folder. Casualty reports, names he couldn't read. They were good men, she whispered. Eric stared at the floor. The sound of distant thunder rolled again, soft and cruel, across the channel. Lieutenant Jack Sullivan sat in a tent that smelled of smoke and rain. His hands shook as he cleaned his goggles, the memory of the dogfight replaying in flashes of light and screaming engines. A photo of Sergeant Will read. Monroe smiled from the table beside him. "You should made it out, Red," he murmured. The victory reports meant nothing. The sky might have been theirs, but peace was nowhere to land. The German base fell quiet as night swallowed the ruins. Eric sat by the barracks, eyes fixed on the stars that shimmered like cold embers. Anneliese joined him, carrying 2 tin cups. "You think they're up there somewhere?" she asked softly. He didn't look at her, only said, "They're everywhere. I close my eyes." The wind whispered through the wreckage, carrying echoes of laughter and fire. Morning brought mist thick enough to hide the world. Inside the command tent, Major Haas spread a map across the table. Eric stood before him, his uniform still smelling of smoke. "We strike again tomorrow," Haas said. Eric hesitated, his voice low. "Sir, maybe it's time to ask what we're fighting for." Haas' expression hardened. "We fight to finish what we started." Outside, thunder rolled again, or maybe it was only memory. The morning began with silence, broken only by the cough of engines warming in the mist. Eric Rayner stood near the runway, staring at the sky as if waiting for it to answer. His squad was gone, but command demanded blood. Major Haas spoke briefly, his tone like iron scraping against stone. "The Americans won't stop," he said. "Neither will we." Eric nodded, but his hands trembled. Somewhere across the clouds, Lieutenant Jack Sullivan loaded ammunition into his P-47, eyes heavy with guilt. 2 men, 2 sides, both haunted by the same echo, the memory of fire that refused to fade. In the American camp, Jack Sullivan tightened his gloves as the sound of bombers filled the air. The mission was clear: intercept German fighters over occupied France. But every time he blinked, he saw Red's plane disappearing into flame. His commander clapped a hand on his shoulder. "We fly to end this faster." Jack nodded, though he knew speed could never outrun guilt. The engines screamed to life, shaking the tent walls as if the world itself was warning them not to take off. Over the French countryside, clouds hung like bruises. Eric's squadron sliced through them, engines howling. He spoke little, his voice flat through the radio. Below, towns burned quietly from yesterday's raids. When radar crackled with warnings, his heart sank. Enemy aircraft inbound. At the same moment, Jack's group spotted black crosses glinting beneath the sun. 2 sets of wings drew closer, History about to repeat itself. In that brief calm before chaos, the sky seemed to hold its breath. The dogfight exploded without warning. Tracers painted the clouds red and gold. Eric dove through gunfire, adrenaline drowning fear. He saw one Thunderbolt spin away, a flash of silver vanishing into the fog. Jack looped back, heart pounding, eyes scanning the blur of wings and smoke. For one suspended moment, the two men locked eyes through streaked glass. Predator and prey, neither certain which they were. Then the thunder came again, and the sky fell apart. Hours later, only rain remained. Eric landed on an abandoned strip, his plane scarred, fuel nearly gone. He sat motionless, staring at the bullet holes along his wings. Each one felt like a confession. Across the channel, Jack returned to base in silence, his men counting losses. "We lost 2, someone said. He didn't answer. Both pilots looked to the same sky that night, divided by distance but bound by the same question. In a war built on orders, could any man still claim innocence? The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than rain. Eric Rayner walked through the airfield wreckage, boots crunching over shattered glass and fragments of wings. Each twisted piece was a mirror, reflecting the face of a man who no longer recognized himself. Major Haas approached, his expression grave. "You lived," he said. "That's enough." But it wasn't. Eric felt it in his bones. Survival was not victory. Across the channel, Jack Sullivan's squad prepared for another mission. He stared at his hands, wondering how they could still tremble even when clean. 2 men breathing the same guilt on different sides of the war, both waiting for justice that never came. Annalise watched Eric from the radio hut window. He hadn't spoken to anyone since returning from the mission. When she finally approached, he was cleaning his boots in silence. "You can't wash off ghosts," she said softly. Eric didn't look up. "Then what do I do with them?" She paused, voice trembling. "Learn their names and carry them." Her words lingered in the air, fragile as the paper reports stacked beside her. In the distance, thunder rolled again. Or maybe memory still had its echo. At the American base, Jack Sullivan received new orders. A bombing run over northern France. He stared at the map, eyes tracing the same coordinates where Red had fallen. His commander's voice faded behind the roar in his mind. "Same ground, same sky," he whispered. "Maybe I'll find him there." The mechanic beside him looked uneasy but said nothing. Jack climbed into his P-47, closing the canopy like a coffin lid. Somewhere across the channel, Eric's squadron was preparing to defend that very sky. As dawn rose, Eric and Major Haas stood beside the Messerschmitts. "You'll lead again," Haas said. Eric hesitated. "I don't deserve to." Haas's reply was sharp. "No one does." The engines started, their roar consuming thought. Eric climbed into his cockpit, every sound reminding him of the lives buried in his wake. Above the clouds, the air turned cold and thin. He closed his eyes for a moment, whispering the names of the men he lost. When he opened them again, the horizon was on fire. The 2 squadrons met once more. Thunder against thunder. Jack's group dove first, cutting through the clouds like shards of light. Eric saw them coming, heart hammering with something between fear and relief. The sky erupted again. Explosions bloomed around them, the air full of streaking bullets and burning fuel. Jack fired, and for a split second saw Eric's eyes through the glass. Not hate, just exhaustion. In that moment, both understood the truth. War had no heroes, only survivors learning to breathe through guilt. The morning after the battle, the air was thick with smoke and guilt. Eric's plane limped back to base, wings scarred and bullet-riddled. When he climbed out, he didn't speak, not even to Major Haas. He simply stared at the sky that had almost killed him again. Haas watched, the lines around his eyes deepening. "You're lucky to be alive," he said quietly. Eric shook his head. "No, sir. I'm just not dead yet." On the other side of the war, Jack Sullivan's plane returned, cracked and smoking, too. He landed hard, climbed out, and walked straight past the medics. Both men had survived another storm, but neither could find peace in it. Annalise found Eric sitting alone near the radio tower that evening, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You should rest," she said gently. "Rest?" he muttered. "I can still hear them screaming when I close my eyes." She hesitated, unsure whether to stay or go. "Then don't close them," she whispered. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the wind moving through the rusted wreckage like ghosts whispering names. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of an approaching siren broke the quiet. In the American camp, Jack Sullivan faced a desk piled with mission reports. His commander spoke in clipped tones. "You shot down 4 enemy aircraft. That's commendable." Jack didn't answer. "Something wrong, Lieutenant?" Jack finally looked up. "Sir, I keep seeing their faces." The room fell quiet. "You did your duty," the officer said. Jack stood slowly. "Then why does it feel like murder?" He left before the silence could reply. Outside, the air was heavy, filled with the smell of oil and ash, the scent of a victory that felt like defeat. Night fell hard on the German base. Major Haas sat alone in his quarters, a telegram open before him, orders to retreat east. He closed his eyes, whispering a prayer for the men buried under his command. When Eric entered, Haas spoke without looking up. "The war's changing," he said. "So are we." Eric replied softly, "Maybe it's too late for that." Haas finally met his gaze. "Not if we choose what kind of men we'll be when it ends." The words settled between them like ashes. Across the channel, Jack stood on a cliff overlooking the sea. The wind howled around him, carrying the faint rumble of distant bombers heading east. He pulled Red's photograph from his pocket. The edges worn, the smile faded. "You'd hate what this has become," he said softly. Somewhere on the opposite shore, Eric stared at the same horizon. For the first time, both men wished for the same thing. Not victory, not vengeance, but a reason to keep fighting that didn't feel like dying. The winter wind tore through the airfield like broken glass. Supplies were low, spirits lower. Eric Rayner stood beside his aircraft, the sky bruised with storm clouds. Major Haas approached, his voice rocked. "Command says the Americans are advancing. They'll be here within weeks." Eric nodded, his jaw tight. "Then maybe this will finally end." Haas sighed. "Endings are for men who make peace with what they've done." Eric said nothing. Across the channel, Jack Sullivan received similar orders, new missions over German lines. Both men were tired of fighting shadows, but the war had decided their paths would cross one last time. Annalise wrapped her coat tighter as she approached Eric. "You're flying again?" she asked. He nodded without looking up. "Someone has to." Her voice cracked slightly. "And if you don't come back?" He met her eyes, tired, distant. "Then maybe the sky finally gets what it's owed." She wanted to stop him, to say something that might pull him back from whatever line he was crossing. But the engines were already roaring. The war didn't wait for love or reason, only orders. In the American base, Jack sat beside his plane, the cold biting through his gloves. His mechanic handed him a mission sheet. "Reconnaissance over Bavaria, light resistance expected." Jack almost laughed. There was no such thing as light resistance anymore. He stared at the map and frowned. The coordinates matched an airfield he'd crossed paths with before. Eric's base. "Same ground again," he muttered. Maybe the war just wants a rematch. The sky was a blur of white and gray as the two squadrons met. Eric's formation rose through cloud banks like phantoms. Jack's team approached from the west, the hum of engines blending with the howl of the wind. When their eyes met again through streaked glass, there was no anger, only recognition. For a moment, The war fell away, and they were just men caught in a machine too large to stop. Then the world exploded again. Gunfire, fire, screams. A storm of humanity tearing itself apart. When the smoke cleared, only one plane still flew. Wings torn, engines stuttering. Eric's Messerschmitt drifted downward in slow circles. Trailing black smoke, on the ground below, Jack's P-47 had already landed, damaged but alive. He looked up as the German fighter spiraled low overhead, its insignia faint beneath the scorch marks. He didn't fire. He simply watched as Eric's plane vanished beyond the tree line, swallowed by snow and silence. For the first time, mercy had outlived rage. Snow fell softly over the forest, muffling the world in silence. Eric Rayner lay among the wreckage of his downed plane, his breath fogging in the freezing air. Every movement burned, but he was alive. He pulled himself free from the cockpit, each step crunching through blood and frost. Above him, the smoke from his aircraft twisted into the clouds like a final confession. Somewhere not far away, Allied patrols moved through the trees. Eric looked up, blinking snow from his lashes. "Maybe this is what justice looks like," he whispered. At the American outpost nearby, Jack Sullivan sat by a small fire, hands trembling around a metal cup. His mind refused to rest. That German plane, the one he hadn't shot down, still burned behind his eyes. When the report came in, downed enemy pilot sighted 2 miles east, he froze. The other soldiers grabbed their rifles, ready for capture. Jack stood too, but slower, thoughtful. He wasn't sure whether he was walking toward an enemy or a reflection. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of boots. Eric leaned against a fallen tree, exhaustion heavy in his chest. He heard voices, English. Instinct told him to reach for his pistol, but he stopped. The war was over for him. It had ended the moment he decided not to laugh again. The soldiers appeared, rifles raised. At their front was Jack Sullivan, his eyes widening in disbelief. The German pilot before him wasn't a monster, just another man frozen by the same regret. Neither spoke. Snow fell between them like forgiveness. Jack lowered his weapon first. "You're the one from the clouds," he said quietly. Eric nodded. "Too weak to stand. I didn't want to die up there," he murmured. "None of us do," Jack replied. He signaled the others to stand down. One soldier protested, but Jack's voice cut through. "He's done fighting." For a long moment they just stared at each other. 2 pilots bound by the same sky, separated only by flags they never chose. Jack reached into his jacket, pulled out a flask and handed it to him. "To the ones we lost," he said. Eric took a sip, eyes glistening. "To all of them." As dusk settled, the patrol began its march back toward camp. Eric limped beside them, leaning on Jack for balance. The war still raged miles away, but in that quiet forest, it already felt like history. "You think we'll ever stop hearing the guns?" Eric asked. Jack looked up at the fading sky. "Maybe not, but one day, we'll stop firing them." Behind them, the wreck of the Messerschmitt burned out completely, smoke curling upward like a promise. That mercy could still exist, even in ashes. The war was ending, though no one dared to say it aloud. Snowmelt dripped from the branches as Allied convoys rolled through the countryside. In a field hospital near the edge of the forest, Eric Rayner lay wrapped in blankets, his once proud uniform replaced by bandages and silence. Across the room, Jack Sullivan watched from a folding chair, arms crossed, exhaustion lining his face. For the first time, there were no sides, no orders, just 2 men trying to understand why they survived. Eric opened his eyes and whispered, "You could have let me die." Jack shook his head. "And become what we both hate." The room fell still. Outside, the sky began to clear. Days passed, and the silence between them softened. Jack brought food, sometimes just sat in the chair beside Eric's bed, saying nothing. "You ever think about what comes next?" Eric asked one morning. Jack smiled faintly. Flying without being shot at, maybe. Eric managed a quiet laugh. Freedom in the air. That's all I ever wanted. For a fleeting second, it felt like they were brothers instead of enemies. Outside, distant bells echoed, the sound of towns being liberated, one by one. When the orders came for prisoner transport, Jack volunteered to escort Eric. The jeep ride was long, the road muddy, and lined with the ruins of war. They spoke little, each lost in thought. "You think people will remember us?" Eric finally asked. Jack looked out the window. Maybe that's the point. The convoy passed through a village where children waved flags of peace, their laughter rising above the ruins. For the first time, Eric smiled without guilt. At the holding camp, Eric stepped from the jeep and paused, breathing in the cold air. "So, this is what the end looks like," he said. Jack nodded. "No, this is what beginning feels like." They shook hands, a quiet gesture between men who had finally laid their ghosts to rest. As guards led Eric away, he looked back once. Jack stood by the jeep, hat in hand, eyes steady. For the first time in years, the world felt still enough for forgiveness. Weeks later, the war was officially over. Jack stood on a quiet airstrip where abandoned planes rested like relics. He placed his flight helmet on the ground and looked up at the empty sky. Somewhere beyond the horizon, men like Eric were rebuilding their lives. He smiled faintly. "Fly safe, whoever's left," he whispered. As the wind picked up, it carried the faint echo of engines. Not of war, but of memory. Above him, the clouds parted, and sunlight poured through like peace, finally taking flight.